So welcome back, everybody, for our sixth and final session of the Harm Reduction Intensive Training Series. We appreciate y'all joining us week after week. Today, we really want to culminate a lot of the information we've been talking about, knowledge we've been sharing with one another, and practice applying some of that to some actual case studies of participants we've worked with at Pathways. So just our general housekeeping as usual. We're going to have a very tight packed hour here today. So please, if you can, be present with us. Today's content really relies on y'all talking and talking to each other. So hopefully you can put aside any other tasks you're working on for a little bit as we finish everything up here today. If you need any CE credit, please stay for the duration of the training. Make sure you're participating in the discussion, you're responding. We don't have any poll questions today, but keeping your camera on for the duration of the training. Questions and comments are welcome throughout. We're going to be talking the whole time today anyway. At the end of the hour, we'll give you a link to a course evaluation so you can receive a certificate. We're going to be culminating all of the information around attendance and CE credit from the past 6 weeks to work on creating some certificates and getting you that CE credit. Those will probably be out sometime in the next week or two, so stay tuned for those. At the end of today's course evaluation, there's also going to be, we're going to revisit that attitudes assessment we did before the training series started. So those questions about how comfortable you feel with harm reduction in your work are going to be added to the end of the course evaluation. So you'll answer all the questions that you have every other week. And after you finish with that, within the same form, you'll be prompted to answer those attitude assessment questions. So make sure you make it all the way through that eval. Our closed captioning is enabled. If you navigate down to your toolbar and click on show captions, those will come up for you. So we're going to do the briefest of brief reviews because we want to jump right into the case studies today. So that's primarily what we're going to be doing. I'm going to look at one case study as a large group, and then we're going to go to some breakout rooms and talk about other case studies, maybe in pairs. We'll give you some final thoughts and send you on your way. So the learning objectives that we've been working on over the past 6 weeks, all here, but today we're really focusing on this last one, demonstrating application of the harm reduction tools and strategies we've been talking about to prevent return to homelessness. We'll do that through some group case study discussion. So y'all should have received an email from me earlier this week, which had our case studies for today, as well as some clinical tools that we were going to be using in today's discussion. They're all things y'all have seen and talked about before, but I'm just going to refresh them on the screen for a second, and then we're going to move right into talking as a group. So throughout the last couple of weeks, we've been talking about over and over the harm reduction principles, things like risk setting, the continuum of use, the readiness ruler, the honest budget, the personal safety plan, as tools we can use in clinical engagements with our participants to explore risk behaviors and talk about harm reduction. Of course, using person-centered language and a lot of motivational interviewing along with that. So all of these various tools, they're rooted in harm reduction principles, they're rooted in trauma-informed care, and we're always kind of utilizing principles from both motivational interviewing and assertive engagement techniques. So just to flash these on your screen again, they're in the PDF that I sent you on Monday. Hopefully you still have that. So the harm reduction principles, you'll have this in your packet as long as an explanation of what all of those mean, what they are. I see risk setting as part of our discussion. We've looked at this a couple of times too. We'll be using the continuum of use in some of our group case studies, talking about the honest budget, the personal safety plan, and the readiness ruler was in there somewhere. I think I skipped over it quickly, but you have all of those in your packet. Make sure you have it on hand. And let's jump right into our first case study that we'll talk about here as a group. Oh, Ryan has nicely put all of that stuff into the Google Drive. So if you don't have access to that email where I sent you those PDFs, you can click on those links in the chat and those will pull up in a web browser for you, so you'll be able to reference them if needed. Ryan, can I toss it over to you to walk us through this first one?
Yeah, so I'm just going to go ahead and read out this case out loud. We'll get a chance to kind of just give some gut reactions to what you're thinking, like what's showing up for you. But then I have some guided prompts that I'll walk us through, right? Kind of one at a time. So let's jump in. This is Lisa, and Lisa is a 55-year-old woman with diagnoses of bipolar 1 disorder and cocaine use disorder. She's been living independently off and on for approximately 6 years. During this time, she's been evicted from 2 different apartments due to excessive foot traffic and damages to the unit. She's currently housed in a large multi-unit apartment building and is at risk of a third eviction for those same reasons. Lisa reports regular use of crack cocaine and alcohol. She expresses ambivalence about changing her relationship to substances, but will engage in conversation about substance use openly with staff. Lisa has a good friend named Teddy, who's also in the program, and they frequently use together in her apartment. Lisa has recently reported concerns for her safety and has requested to move, stating she owes money to drug dealers who live in her building. She's also reported previous sexual relationships with the maintenance staff who work for the apartment complex. Lisa has a daughter who works as her home health aide. Her daughter has 4 children and brings them with her to the unit. The team suspects they regularly stay at the apartment. Remember, Pathways is a single adults only program. We've also noticed that tasks typically completed by a home health aide do not seem to be occurring, as Lisa still requests significant assistance with shopping and cleaning. Lisa suffers from osteoarthritis and reports significant pain and impairment in mobility. She uses a walker, and her doctor has recommended a bilateral hip replacement. She's been scheduled for surgery on her right hip for the last 7 months, but the procedure keeps getting pushed back because Lisa repeatedly fails the urine drug screen she's required to submit before she can have anesthesia. All right, there's a lot here in this case. We're hoping that some of this is kind of familiar, right, in terms of the work that you're doing, in terms of helping people maintain their tenancy. So I want to kind of walk us through some questions. And we are a pretty small group. I'd actually like to encourage folks to just like unmute and shout out their answers, or type in the chat, whatever is feeling comfortable for you. So first question here at the top. What are some of the risks that you're noting, right? We talk so much throughout this training about risky behavior, high risk behavior, as a way of managing, coping with trauma, et cetera, et cetera. So what are the risks that you're seeing right off the bat?
Well, she certainly to her grandchildren.
Oh, that's my fault. I said just shout out and you just did it. I love it. Thank you. Let's take Dre and then we'll go to Nathaniel next.
Well, one of the risks that she's presenting is that she's jeopardizing our housing, right, by having her daughter and her daughter's children stay over. Another risk is perhaps risky behavior in regards to sex. It's stated that she's having sexual activity with the maintenance staff in the program or in the building. So there was 2 off the top of my head.
Great. Yeah. And one, of course, we're a housing program. One of them is like putting her at risk in the program, right? Like it's risk in terms of maintaining tenancy, as well as the sexual risk and risk to her health potentially. Nathaniel, please.
Yeah, I'm worried about her grandkids being in a space where she's been threatened by the dealers she owes money to. And I think that's a case where I probably couldn't offer help to them directly, but would offer to try and find appropriate services to connect to them with, if that could minimize the amount of time they were spending in the unit in the building.
Yeah, so not just a risk to Lisa's own safety, but the safety of her grandkids who are there in the apartment frequently, and then sort of feeling like your hands are tied in that those children aren't your client, but you're still wanting to sort of do something to connect them to some resources or services, right? So that risk is less present. Great. Other thoughts? What are other people seeing in terms of risk here?
In terms of mobility, and she was supposed to have bilateral hip replacement, but she's not able to have it because of she failed the urine drug screen. So that's another.
Yeah, and that mobility potentially has consequences. We'll talk about some of the consequences in a minute, but that mobility has sort of other effects for her. Great, thank you for sharing that one. Others?
No one speaking up. I think ambivalence is kind of an interesting word to use there. And it suggests that there is room for a conversation to ask about the relationship between this surgery, the fact that it's making her dependent on someone who, her daughter, who seems not to be able to perform the tasks that she needs, and her substance use. Not going to tell her what to do, but just there's a pretty clear line between those. Are you seeing that line? What are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, and there, as you mentioned, there is like a potential openness to that discussion. But I think kind of just stepping back, kind of keeping it simple in terms of what are the risks. One of the risks is that her cocaine use is preventing her from dealing with that mobility issue, I think is kind of the underlying point that you're hitting us with there. Anything else that people are seeing? Have we hit most of the risks that you're seeing? I think we
Well,
have. I think we've. Oh, go ahead, Herb.
No, I was thinking about her bipolar 1 disorder and using cocaine. I'm thinking that mixing bipolar and cocaine gets you to, I guess I would say, exacerbates her I would say her symptoms. I don't know if whether she's taking meds or not, but that's another.
Yeah, potentially. I think you're thinking along the lines of like the ups, right? The
Yeah.
ups of that bipolar 1 disorder combining with cocaine use.
Okay.
Could really exacerbate some of those symptoms and have a greater effect on her. Yeah.
I mean, also raises the question, like, is she leveling out the lows by trying to bounce back up? And in that case, is that a conversation you can have around medication? Like, are there other ways you could try and even out?
Right. Nathaniel is just like cannot help themselves from just being like, what if we try this? I love it. You're like ready to problem solve immediately.
Oh yeah, I'm sorry. Sorry.
No, it's okay. Because we're gonna get there. I just think I'm just pulling your leg a little bit. Great. Okay. So we've talked about a bunch of risks. What are the potential consequences we want to mitigate, right? What are some of these downstream effects of the risks that we've noted here? And we've listed a bunch of things here already, but like, what do we want to mitigate? We're the program working with her. We're the case managers working with her. What do we want to, like, I don't know, shield her from, help her avoid, etc.
Further mental and physical duress.
Yeah, I think you're kind of thinking just along the lines of like general well-being, right? Physically and mentally. Yeah, great. Other things.
And we want to
folks are
keep
wanting
our
to help.
house. Sorry.
Yes, we want to mitigate eviction, right? And then ultimately, like, not even just eviction and rehousing, but like a return to homelessness. Yeah, absolutely. Other things people are thinking about.
I think we also want to minimize the risk to the rest of the participants in the program. Because as we stated in the overview, she's using with another participant who very much may be at risk himself, you know, and that cascades into other residents in the program. So
That's a good point. You know, I don't know that I've ever heard somebody mention that piece of it as a thing we want to mitigate. I think you're not wrong there. Yeah, it's just one that we haven't talked about as much. There's another participant involved, and there are risks there too. Absolutely. What else? What else do we want to mitigate? Potential consequences.
Going off of Dre's point, I would say to her family, trying to mitigate any consequences to her family.
Can you say more about what those consequences could be?
Well,
a couple of family members involved here.
Right, to the kids being exposed to everything that's going on now.
Yeah, and that kind of, it's hard to talk about risks and consequences and as different things, but Nathaniel kind of alluded to that too, right? Like there are drug dealers involved who present kind of a physical threat to Lisa, but also to her family members, the children that could potentially get swept into that. Yeah.
They could also end up in foster care if somebody wanted to report, you know, the house is, all it takes is one phone call for someone to come in and, you know, look at the household, and DCF could be involved.
Yeah, and so while we want to, prevent consequences to the children in terms of like their physical safety, there's also this consequence that I think we would want to prevent of or mitigate of breaking the family up. And so how do we avoid that? Yeah, good one. Good double-edged sword there with that issue.
Well, I don't know. I know here in Massachusetts that we are mandated reporters. And if there's any harm that we either see or possibly could be perceived, that we have to report to DCF. So that may be a way, as you said, to mitigate some of the harm that may be caused to the young kids. But I don't know how that would play in terms of the relationship with the client.
Sure. Different kinds of harms that we're talking about there. Absolutely. Yeah. Mitigate one, maybe cause another. Maybe that's worth it. Yeah. Something to weigh and consider. Let's step to this next one. What's our ultimate end goal, right? Like, so if you're the case manager in this case, if you could pick one or two things that you would really love to kind of move towards as an endpoint for Lisa, or as like a thing to work toward, what do you see as the main goal here?
Keep her housed.
Yeah, absolutely. A return to home. That's the whole reason for this program. I'll say that. Yeah.
Avoid homelessness.
Other thoughts?
A sustainable situation. I don't think that like it's her choice if she wants to focus on her hip. I mean, there's things that I want, but a situation where she has supports that are meeting her needs. So if she has a home health aide, that her shopping is getting done, that the things that need to get done are getting done. But what that looks like, I think we can talk together.
Yeah, it's you're presenting kind of a more subjective idea, or like a more client-focused idea than maybe where I was leading you in this question, which is like, what's our goal for her? Well, it's like, what is she able to kind of cope with? What can she sit with in a way that she's like happy enough, well enough? Sustainable is an interesting word, in that it is like a pretty subjective word too. I think what's sustainable for her, what's sustainable for all of us. Yeah. So thinking about these kind of goals that we have, well, let me just ask, anybody else have other ideas about what's a goal? If you're the case manager, what's your goal? No wrong answers here.
You know,
This is a real case, but no wrong answers. Go ahead.
I'll throw it out there. I mean, I think certainly that one of the goals is to reduce her use, right? And that may prove to be a difficult goal to reach. It may have to be done piecemeal, but I think it should be put on the table for her to decide and come up with a plan on perhaps how to do that.
Yeah, I think I hear in your response, maybe like a tentativeness to say like, we're talking about harm reduction this whole series, right? And so we're trying to, like we've stated many times, that like abstinence is not the goal per se, but I think you're not wrong that like she talks about ambivalence, right? Or we've talked about there's an ambivalence to the relationship to substances here, which means that I think we can put that on the table. What about a change in relationship to those substances? Nobody's asking you to stop if that's not what you want to do, but I wonder is there room to discuss something different, some possible changes here? Yeah, I think I like your thinking there. Okay, so our goal is to make sure that she does not return to homelessness. Perhaps we have a goal of at least having a conversation around the relationship to substances. We have a goal of trying to find some kind of sustainable, like status quo that is like manageable for Lisa. We have a goal of mitigating any harm to the children that are involved. What are the strategies that we want to use to get there? Right? Like what, if you had to think through those goals that we just outlined, what's your approach? How do you start to tackle that?
Probably discuss the pros and cons of a substance use. What is it that you like about it? What is it that you don't really like about it? What's so good? What's not so good about your use?
Yeah, doing some maybe decisional balancing around like, how's this serving you? How's it not? Being a little transparent about the pros and cons there. Yeah, I like that. Other ideas, other interventions you might use.
I mean, she's in a space where it sounds like substances are available. It's a way that she's socializing. And I think that stimulants especially are traditionally challenging. Is she aware of stimulant clinics or new treatments that might be available? Is this something that she'd be open to having a conversation with someone who specializes in this around? And also asking her about her daughter's capacity to be a home health aide, and say that we're not trying to take away her daughter's source of income. We understand that she's trying to help her daughter by giving this job, but what can we do to problem solve around making sure your groceries are getting bought for you, or the cleaning is getting done, and that your daughter is not something weighing on you, her situation?
Yeah, I don't think we said it that clearly enough, although I know you're a very savvy group who are doing the work. Yes, the issue around the home health aide is that it's a mutually beneficial circumstance, right? She's able to be a patient in home health aide for her daughter, and so the daughter gets income there, but that gets tangly because remove that source of income, do you jeopardize the relationship between mom and daughter? And yet she's not getting her needs met. And so it sounds like Nathaniel's idea here is the intervention is to do some problem solving, some brainstorming around how can we still make sure everybody's needs are getting met, especially yours, right? Like, how do we make sure that your needs are getting met here too, and not just your daughter's? Yeah. Other ideas around interventions. What are you using? Any of those tools that we've talked about in the review section in last session? Anything that you think might be helpful?
Maybe develop some discrepancy in terms of what do you see, where do you see yourself 5 years from now? How, talk about how her behavior might not be conducive to where she sees herself down the road. I'm not sure exactly, but along that way.
I like that. Yeah. So motivational interviewing, I think, is the thing you're kind of keying in on there. Yep. You're developing discrepancy. And I love that question around like, what do you see yourself in 5 years? I'm not like trying to control your behavior now. I want to know what you want for your future. Right? And is anything that's happening now moving you in that direction? Is anything blocking you from moving in that direction? Any room for change there? Yeah. Great one. Love that.
I mean, along those lines, we can also introduce the readiness ruler.
Okay. Around which issue in particular, I wonder?
Well, I mean, several issues. I mean, depending on which one you deem the most important, or the one that she's most receptive to dealing with, you could use the readiness ruler to find out where she's at in the spectrum. Is she willing to do this to gain that? Or,
Maybe even as a way, I think what I hear you saying is that like there are a couple of directions we could go here, and maybe even using the readiness ruler to kind of point to which one holds greater importance for her, right? Oh, that's the one that's important. Well, what barriers are there? How confident are you that you could actually move in that direction? Yeah, kind of using it as like a way to kind of poke at a couple of different issues may be helpful. Nice. So motivational interviewing, readiness ruler. Any last ideas here?
Maybe the stages of change to get a sense of where she's at in terms of her readiness to change in terms of.
Yeah. Are you thinking in terms specifically around the substance use?
Different, but substance use, hip replacement, different. she could be in different levels in terms of
Yeah.
different stages for each one of these. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that. I was going to say it if you weren't, which is that, like, I think sometimes when we're initially taught the stages of change, we think like, oh, a person is in contemplation as a person, almost like as a personal attribute. And the reality is we have different levels of readiness towards different components and ideas in our lives, right? I may be really ready to talk about my substance use, but I'm not really ready to talk about, I may be in pre-contemplation around my hip replacement, right? Or whatever else, right? And so different levels of readiness. Yeah. And then the last question here is, of the things we've talked about, we talked about using motivational interviewing, talked about helping her make sure that she can get her needs met in this home health aid relationship, maybe offering some information around other substance use treatment options, right? Especially around stimulant use, which can be different and difficult to cope with when I'm trying to meet social needs, right? It helps me feel up and connect with people. So we've got a number of interventions we've kind of talked about. How do any of those affirm those principles of harm reduction? What principles of harm reduction are you really kind of keying in on as we explore this case with Lisa?
Your patient, well, I would say patient-centered first, meaning we let her make a choice in terms of us telling her to do what we want her to do.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly very much want her to not show up to the clinic with cocaine in her urine screen so that she can get that hip replacement so that she can be more independent. Those are things that I want for her. But of the interventions we've talked about, we're really kind of centering her choice and her ideas about what's important. And we're using things like the readiness ruler to do that, developing some discrepancies that she could picture and imagine her life 5 years from now. Absolutely.
I think people have called attention to her health outcomes, those of her neighbor Teddy, her grandchildren, just focusing on their health and well-being as a goal.
Yeah, health and dignity would be the principle that shows up there. Absolutely. Yeah, concerned about people's well-being. Absolutely. Understanding that she's like getting key needs met with Teddy, with having her children there, with her grandchildren there, her daughter. Yeah. Great. All right. Any other last comments before I peel back the curtain and talk to you a little bit about how we approach this case in real life? All right, let's do it. So we did a number of things that you suggested, actually. We did continue to offer additional info on substance use treatment options. We don't want to take that off the table. There is a connection between her substance use and owing drug dealers, inability to get a surgery, etc. So we continue to bring that into the conversation. Another thing we did is we moved her into a kind of a row home setup, right? Not one of these bigger congregate type buildings. And so there were kind of fewer neighbors around to get tangled in relationships that were not really serving her ongoing tenancy, her maintained tenancy, right? So it was a smaller unit also, and it offered a little bit less space to house others, right? Which is sometimes a way for us to move through that issue. And people don't want to leave people behind, especially when they exit homelessness. And so sometimes a smaller unit where 4 other people can't stay there offers a reason for people to say, it was a little too small. Sorry, you can't come in. This is a case where, and I think we referenced this in a previous training, but there was a really great doctor, surgeon that was willing to work with her and with us around this issue of the hip replacement. And so this doctor suggested, what if she switched just temporarily to smoking weed, pretty heavily, instead of smoking crack, so that she could just get through that period of giving a clean urine, and be able to get the anesthesia and get that hip replacement. And guess what? It worked. It was practical and realistic for her in that moment in time. And she was able to get one of her hips replaced. I believe she still has not had that second hip replaced.
Still waiting on number 2.
Yeah.
We're still waiting on number 2.
Yep. So it's a work in progress, but the practical and realistic, we love to kind of share that example because not always will you find a medical professional willing to kind of work with you in that way, but also offer a solution that's workable for the folks that we're serving. Another thing we did was connected her to a home health agency that could better help her meet her needs. And so that did end up causing, moving the daughter out of the picture in that way. But ultimately, it was a decision she was willing to be in agreement with because there were some key needs being unmet for her, and she was able to see that and do that. So we used things like the continuum of use to explore conversations around her relationship with substances, the honest budget around like grocery shopping and understanding her relationship with her daughter and that income and spending, the readiness ruler, as you mentioned, and then we did some safety planning with her, especially kind of thinking about the drug dealer issue and potential physical risk there for her. So in terms of the harm reduction principles that really stand out for me, thinking about the way the continuum of use really allowed us to explore some of those really valid reasons for her relationship with substances, right? The social and belongingness needs she was able to meet with Teddy. Really crucial, right? Like I think it's easy to say, stop hanging out with Teddy. That's no good for you. But like that's meeting a key need for her, and that's valid, right? We have to honor that with people. I think in terms of like go ahead, somebody.
Ryan, how did you address that, the social issue?
Do you want to say any more about that, Andrew?
I think these are just ongoing conversations, right? Like with any kind of like risk behavior, it's our job to figure out what need that behavior is meeting, right? And sometimes we can find other healthier ways to meet that need, or sometimes, again, I think Herb said it, right? Just helping explore some discrepancies. So I think there are ongoing conversations, and folks are aware when the people in their lives are maybe not the best influence versus are, a positive person in their life. Folks understand that like our relationships can be complicated, and that's okay as long as we're approaching those conversations without, messages of stigma and shame, right? Like, so Teddy's just another person in the program that's also in need of support and assistance as well. We don't want to like demonize one person or another, right? Everyone's kind of like struggling with their own problems. So looking what we're getting out of those relationships and kind of allowing Lisa to make her own conclusions about how she wants to move forward. And I'll say they've been friends for years. And I think probably in this particular situation, even though there's some challenging stuff, the good definitely outweighs the bad here. So, but allowing folks to make those decisions for what feels right for them.
One way, and not with Lisa in particular, but one way that we approach that, Dre, too, is considering other social outlets. Are there day programs that people want to become involved in? Sometimes having them drop in at the office more frequently and hanging out with the team a bit more. Sometimes people are willing to engage in volunteering or things like that. So those are some other ways that we try and approach that conversation. Again, not particularly with Lisa there. Okay. So go ahead, Andrew. Do you want to say something else?
I was actually gonna take a vote and see if folks are feeling breakout rooms or if folks are feeling continue as a whole group. We can do either. I'll say an hour isn't going to be enough time to send everybody to a breakout room and have everybody report back. Because we only have about 24 minutes left. What are y'all feeling? Do you want to do similar conversations just like we did in small groups in rooms of like 3 people, 4 people, or do you want to continue as the large group? What are you feeling?
Large group.
Large group?
Large group.
Large group.
Yeah, y'all are being really talkative. If y'all weren't talking at all, I would make you go to small breakout rooms to talk to each other. So you would have to talk, but everybody is like really awake and engaged right now, and I'm enjoying the conversation. So I think we just stay together if that's okay. I do need my people on the phone to unmute for 1 second and at least tell me who you are though, so I can count your attendance. Do y'all know how to do that? If you press *6, you should be able to unmute.
Camelia Horsley. Casey Walker, Commonwealth Land Trust.
Got it. Is that it? Just Stacy and Camellia?
Yeah, those are the two that I see.
All right.
Mhm.
Thanks, y'all. Okay, let's take it on to the next case.
Great. Okay, so here's Derek. I'll read it out loud for you again. Derek is a 50-year-old male with a diagnosis of schizoaffective disorder, alcohol use disorder, and seizure disorder. He's been living independently for 3 years, but in the last year has begun regularly missing home visits and sometimes goes missing for long stretches of time. Could be anywhere from 2 days to 3 months. When Derek shows up after having been missing, he does not realize how long he's been gone. Sometimes we find him after he's been admitted to the hospital for a seizure. The team believes he may be in the early stages of dementia, but Derek also drinks heavily when he's socializing with his friends. Derek reports medication adherence, says he's taking his meds, but his medication supply indicates that he only takes his meds intermittently. We're unsure if he's just saying what we want to hear or if he believes he's taking his medication daily but losing track of time. We've talked to Derek about our concerns regarding his drinking, seizure disorder, going missing, etc., but he doesn't seem to understand or relate to these problems. Derek also appears to have trouble maintaining his apartment. His hot water was not working for weeks, and he did not report this issue to anyone. He stores and cooks his food in unsafe ways. He often loses his keys and will sleep outside in the cold or the rain, as he doesn't have a cell phone or a way to contact the team. When he visits the office, his clothes are frequently soiled and he smells strongly of urine. More recently, the team has noticed changes in Derek's mood. While he's historically been very friendly and outgoing, he now sometimes seems agitated and angry, especially following a recent seizure. He appears to have lower impulse control, and his behavior seems somewhat unpredictable. Derek very much values his independence and loves having an apartment of his own. He has nearby family, but we're unsure of how regularly he's in contact with them. All right, so there's a lot going on with this case. Let me bring up our questions here. And kind of very similar to our last conversation, right? I want to walk these down from top to bottom. What are the risks that are standing out as you're hearing this case? What risks are present?
He has a seizure disorder, so if he misses, I don't know if he's taking his meds, but if he is taking his meds, if he's missing from 2 days to 3 months, that means that he's not taking his meds on a regular basis. So that could potentially be it could lose, something bad could happen to him in terms of his seizure disorder.
Yeah, so he's gone missing for long periods of time, and there's a risk that he has a seizure, as he may be unmedicated, and then nobody knows where he is, right? And that actually has happened, in that we find him when he shows up in a hospital. We'll find him in a hospital after one of those periods. Yeah. What else? What are the risks you're seeing here?
I don't know what else this medication is for, but that jumps out at me. If he's not tracking taking his medication, it also suggests that he's not tracking how long the food that was stored unsafely might have been there. So that's a whole realm of risk.
Kind of just, yeah, like the awareness of time has a couple of effects. Awareness of time, place, or whatever has a couple of effects. Not taking his medication, but yeah, storing that food unsafely, which we saw is happening. Doesn't know how long that's been happening. May eat food that's unsafe and unsanitary and could cause significant health effects there. Yeah.
He's also not maintaining his apartment, and he's living as if he's homeless by, one, his hot water's not working and not reporting it to anyone, storing food that can be unsafe as well and possibly eating it. So that's also a risk to his health. And he's also a risk in his housing, because usually if he has any type of subsidy, you have to have all your utilities on so that you don't lose it.
Yeah, kind of similar to the last case. Like ultimately, we want to keep people housed, and if he's acting in ways in his apartment that is putting his housing at risk, that is not okay. We're not okay with that, right? And then, yes, as you mentioned, kind of reiterating the health risks of, not having hot water, it's unsanitary, the food issue again, absolutely. Anything else people are noticing or standing out as risks?
The other thing, the other one is that he drinks heavily. So if a client is drinking heavily, so that could interfere with his medication, his seizure medication. That's one. The other thing is also if he's drinking heavily and he all of a sudden stops drinking, he could get into withdrawal, and that could cause a seizure as well. So that's another, I guess, another risk.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. This kind of interaction between the alcohol and the medications that he's using, potential significant health effects there. Yeah.
And his hygiene and personality are changing. So that's a red flag. Something's gone askew.
Yeah, what do you make of that? And is there risk involved there? I mean, certainly some of that is not a choice, I guess, but what do you make of that, Cynthia? Just to kind of pick at that a little bit.
Well, I don't know, really. I mean, some of it could just be, from using alcohol. People do change their hygiene as their brains change with heavy use. So,
I think that's fair, right? Like, it's not really clear
right.
how that's, where that's coming from and what all effects it may be having on him. That uncertainty feels risky to me, right? We're not sure where it's coming from and what could be happening.
I mean, what will he do with this lower impulse control, especially if this is spiraling? But answering the question that you asked Cynthia about, I don't know, right? Like, I'm not medical staff, I'm a case manager. We had a patient who has a long history of drinking and recently started becoming delusional and was trying to figure that out. And that seems to be malnutrition related, which is not something that I was particularly aware of as a possibility. Yeah. So, like, I would reserve judgment. You asked Cynthia what it was about, and I feel like I recently learned the lesson. Yeah, I don't know. Let's try and connect him with people who can figure it out.
Yeah, good point. Absolutely.
I have a guy who has put himself in a wheelchair because he's drinking so much and falls down so often, and his mental health is declining so rapidly that I've had outreach workers call me and say what's going on with him,
Mm-hmm.
So I made a doctor's appointment because I keep telling him that if he doesn't get out of the wheelchair, he's going to be in it for the rest of his life. And he says, no, they beat me up, they pushed me down, and my hip's broken, which is not true. They wouldn't have released him from the hospital if his hip was broken. Might be fractured or bruised and he is in pain, but he wants to, just stay in the wheelchair, makes him feel better.
Mm-hmm.
A victim, I guess, which is his MO. He's, always the victim when he gets pushed down and beat up and robbed. It doesn't have anything to do with the alcohol. It's the other people doing it to him. So dementia is, alcoholism can certainly affect your brain.
Yeah, I think that's kind of the main point that I'm taking away from this last couple of minutes here is, like, a lot of this is unclear and the team is unclear. Our clinical team is unclear. Like, what's causing what's happening here? And so let me return us to our questions here. What are the potential consequences we want to mitigate? What can we protect Derek from? What would, what sort of, if we play the tape through in Derek's case, what are we hoping to mitigate?
Eviction. We're trying to avoid him being evicted, because it does mention that Derek very much values his independence and loves having an apartment on his own.
Yep. And we don't want to see him end up in a place where that independence is stripped from him or doesn't have his apartment anymore. Yeah, absolutely. Her laser focused on the maintaining the tenancy, which I love that.
Maybe getting him a home health aide to help him clean his house, or sit down and have a conversation about, doing his laundry and his hygiene. And that might just improve his mood, as far as being angry.
Yeah, so jumping ahead to like interventions, you're kind of immediately thinking like he might need some support, like in-home support that could actually have other effects, like other positive effects around his mood and well-being. Yeah.
Well, I think
Other thing-
a visiting nurse might assist him too, agreeable to it. Because there's some question whether he's taking his medication regularly or properly. And I don't know, based on the description, it sounds as though he might be decompensating, and he probably would benefit from a psych eval or a med eval at the very least.
I can get just Santiago to come on in.
Okay. Yeah, I'm hearing you. Kind of we're on like the medical track a lot. Our head is in this place where it's like,
Yeah,
I think similar to
the risk
Nathaniel's
is we don't want to know how bad those seizures or non-med compliance can get.
Yeah, the kind of long-term effect or the acute effect that could happen if this happens in the wrong time, or we don't know where he is or whatever. Yes, absolutely. And so what's our end goal for Derek? Oh, I'm sorry, I cut somebody off. Go ahead.
No, I was just looking at it. So sometimes he loses his key and he sleeps outside in the cold. So we're trying to avoid frostbite. That's another.
Yeah, and as well as, let me just add on my own thoughts here, just like the vulnerability of like being outside, vulnerability to, especially if, with poor impulse control and maybe kind of unaware of what's going on, he could be taken advantage of. But yes, the kind of effects of rain, cold, heat, etc. Yeah. And so what's our end goal for Derek? If we had to like map this out for Derek, like what goals would we have for him?
Keep him housed, for one.
Yes. Yep. How do we help him maintain his independence, right? Independence in housing.
I mean,
What
that
else?
was like, how do you balance as much autonomy and independence against getting to the root of these behavioral and medical issues that are showing up?
Do we have to? Do we have to balance? Can you say more about why do you think those things are in conflict?
Oh, I mean, you just want to offer interventions that are less invasive first, right? I think
Sure.
Cynthia mentioned like home health aide, but also visiting nurse for his meds and just helping him count, or if he has a pill sort, like if he has a pill organizer, is he able to track what day of the week it is? Maybe not, but like the pill organizer could still be a first step.
Yeah, maybe we never get to the point where he's like super tracking every day of the week, but maybe we don't have to in order for him to like keep his medication consistent and stay well. Yeah. Did you have something else? I'm sorry, I feel like I cut you off there.
No, that's fine. I mean,
yep.
Because if you don't, at some point he might require being in a nursing home or something. And those are steps that we're trying not to get to.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that. We haven't talked about nursing home yet so far in this conversation. And that would obviously be like against his, like he's pretty clear that he doesn't want to be in a nursing home. He likes his independence, he likes his apartment. And yet if things continue as they are, that may be an end point. Maybe that's a consequence that we want to mitigate, is ultimately having to arrive in a nursing home earlier than maybe he would need to be otherwise, right? All right, so what are our strategies, folks? What interventions do we want to use? I heard home health aide, I heard visiting nurse, and Pathways does have a nurse on our clinical teams. And so that is a relevant and useful intervention for sure. What other interventions are we thinking?
What about a recovery coach? Introducing him to a recovery coach or a peer mentor?
Say more about like what do you want to kind of like have that person work on with them, or like what do you think might come out of that sort of
Well, that would
relationship?
be if he's receptive to it. First of all, it's really about the relationship. So, you know, he could say, hey, if you take a shower, we could, go out for a cup of coffee or, take in a meeting or something, just, it would be something to do. But I don't know what his social life is anyways, he just goes missing, so
Yeah.
could be doing.
You're
things.
thinking like get him involved a little bit, kind of community oriented involvement. Recovery coach. I heard the word recovery coach. You thinking like, is that person? And I heard you say meetings. Are we thinking like there's some conversation around the drinking that maybe could happen or should happen?
Yeah, it could, it's up to him, of course, but
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, I like the idea of like a peer support person, like jumping in there and like getting to know him a little bit, spending more time with him, right? Like he goes missing for large stretches of time. What's happening there? Is he trying to meet people? And so maybe kind of having somebody closer to him could be helpful in that. Yeah.
I'm also thinking therapy as well, because it says in here that he's agitated, and his mood has been changing, and he hasn't been that type of a person all the time. So maybe some of his medical conditions is changing his mood. Maybe those things could be making him use or not. So maybe having some type of, assessment or therapy may be helpful.
Okay. Yeah. Something more. I mean, we certainly like have case management readily available, nursing readily available. Less frequently do we talk about kind of the more mental health therapy oriented side of things. And maybe that's useful here, especially as his mood is changing. Yeah.
I think we can introduce him to the personal safety plan and see where he goes with that, or what he can identify or some of his issues that he could possibly work on, or first just to identify would be a big step.
Yeah. And then I love that, because then maybe he does go missing, but maybe he's got a paper in his pocket that helps him walk through some steps. All right, what do I need to do? I don't know what's going on. I don't know where I'm at. Who do I call? How do I call somebody?
Well, and that's the other thing you mentioned in this scenario. He doesn't have a phone. Perhaps acquiring a phone for him might be a great benefit.
Okay, yeah, a way to kind of like connect with him, have him connect with supports. Yeah, getting him a phone. Such a like common intervention, and we all walk around with phones. I think sometimes we forget about that basic thing. Like, let's get people connected again, that way. I love it.
I think
Other ideas.
I don't know what you can supply to help him store food in a healthier way, whether that's something you have to come up with, but just problem solving around that.
Yeah, some problem solving around, or maybe even some like basic education around how to store food, how to cook and store food.
Yeah, I mean, problem solving. I don't understand this case, right? Like that your description could mean a number of things, that he is confused in a way that he's in the moment, in these moments of confusion, or is it like, so yeah.
It's not clear in the case. You're right. Yeah. Anything else people are thinking of?
I was thinking about a way of helping him keep his keys. I don't know whether something around his neck, or I don't know.
You're thinking like a lanyard or some other way to keep his keys. Yeah.
Key in terms of prevent him from losing him next time.
So in terms of, let me just like recap a little bit. Some of the strategies that we're talking about are ways to help him take his meds, ways to like take care of his apartment through the home health aide, ways to like figure out that conversation around cooking and storing food. What's the actual issue there, and like how do we problem solve that? Some strategies around helping him hold on to his keys, getting him a phone. We've talked about therapy. Yeah, so a bunch of strategies. Of the things that we're thinking of, how do those proposed interventions affirm the principles of harm reduction? Like, where are you seeing harm reduction show up in your proposed interventions?
Well, his involvement with it, how much he wants to be involved and what his goals are would be the participants' involvement. Like,
Okay,
you
yeah.
know, do these things, if you present a few strategies to any of these hit home with you? You know, how can
Right.
we help you with that? Or,
Right, kind of, yeah, letting him drive the ship a little bit
Yeah.
too. Yep.
he might like disappearing for a couple of days, who knows?
He might need a little break from us, right? He's like,
Yeah.
this program people are in my apartment all the time. I need to get lost for a little while.
Well, I guess making sure that he doesn't lose his keys. That's one way. It's reducing harm.
To me, when I hear you say that, I hear the practical and realistic, that principle show up a little bit, right? Like, how do we just like keep him able to access his apartment? And a lanyard, that's very practical. Who knows if that's a trick or not, but yeah. Let's, in the interest of time, let me pause our conversation here. Andrew is going to pull back the curtain a little bit and talk about what worked or what we tried with Derek, and then we'll take us through a review slide since we're kind of approaching the end of our time here.
Yeah, I'll say, heard the idea around folks losing their keys all the time. A strategy we didn't use with Derek, but we've used with a lot of other folks is getting a lockbox where the key is actually tethered inside the lockbox. So you can open up the lockbox, pull the key out enough to unlock the door, but you can't just take the key out, put it in your pocket, because then people would just lose that key all the time. So then they got to put the key back in the lockbox, close up, then you can go inside that, or a key code deadbolt. So all you have to do is remember a 4-digit code, your birth year, or something like that to be able to get in and out of the house. So that's been one strategy that's been helpful for folks who lose their keys a lot. I'll also say we have a key making machine on site at Pathways to Housing. And one of the first things I did after working here for a couple of weeks was like, somebody show me how to use the key machine. I can't be waiting around for keys all day long. It's actually very easy and it makes you feel really cool when you put on the safety goggles and do it yourself. Okay, so what we did with Derek, first of all, we did some travel training with him, right? Practical and realistic. He's going to be going back and forth to different neighborhoods all the time, getting lost in the community for extended periods of time, making sure that he knew how to get around on the subway with a CPS had been helpful. What else did we do? We offered Derek a day program where he could go and spend time with other folks. He was kind of like intermittently invested in that. Wasn't always his first choice. He really preferred to be spending time with folks that he knew better. Probably the most effective thing with Derek was getting him a home health aide. Somebody who was able to be in the unit with him a little bit more often. Somebody like a mobile psych rehab worker, I think in other contexts would be really useful. But home health aide really helped with the storing of the food and the helping with daily medication monitoring and things of that nature. We are piloting a program where we're trying medication dispensers with folks who have trouble maintaining adherence. So they're automated medication dispensers. And then sometimes something as simple as having someone's medications, our pharmacy will put them in a blister pack where you can tear off individual daily doses. And we've taken like a big desk calendar, like an office desk calendar, and taped the daily doses to the calendar. That is more helpful for somebody who's better at keeping track of time and keeping track of the days than Derek was at times. But that was helpful. What else? We also got him a medical alert, medical ID bracelet. So if he did get lost in the community, we would be able to help get him back home a little bit easier. So just some ideas and some strategies for our work with Derek. So you have a copy of these slides. Please feel free to check out some of the other case studies when you have time. My computer is responding really slowly to clicking. Ryan, can you just get me to the working with high needs population slide? So a couple ideas here in the end, right? It sounds like the cases that we were talking about feel pretty familiar to y'all and the folks that you are working with. So the participants that we're serving in our programs that are a good fit often for housing first programs, low barrier housing programs, harm reduction programs, right? Our participants are not always polite. They are gonna forget about appointments. They're gonna show up late for stuff. They're going to lose everything, their keys, their medications, their paperwork, their ID, their social security card. They'll often ask for things early, refills on their meds, their financial disbursements. They'll often have difficulty with transportation. They'll need special accommodations, right? Or this idea that people just don't seem motivated, right? I think we talked a couple sessions ago about the idea of like, I can't help somebody who doesn't want to help themselves, right? But I think hopefully what we've imparted in talking about harm reduction with you all over the past 6 weeks is that, you know, the challenges that our folks are facing, they stem from poverty and disability, right? Not from moral failings. So I think part of what we need to consider is how do we provide compassion in addition to treatment for people? I think I probably also threw out like one of my favorite quotes, right? Healing is not a relationship between an expert and a problem. Healing is a relationship between two people, right? And so just because we've gone to school for 4 years or 6 years or however long, right? Our participants don't want us to just put on a cape and swoop in and save the day. Our participants want us to listen to them, ask them what they want, and ask how we can support, how we can help. So I think sometimes when we feel frustrated, when our empathy well has run dry, we can stop and kind of remember like, what does it mean to provide equitable care for folks who have otherwise been left out and left behind? A lot of the individuals that we are serving come to us in pretty rough shape, right? Because they've been experiencing stigma and receiving messages of shame, discharged from programs, turned away by providers who told them, you know, you just need to make a decision. You just need to stop doing that. You've got to change, right? And just not recognizing that our participants are often just trying to get by in the world with like what little they do have and relying on skills that have historically helped them to survive. So remembering harm reduction and housing first, these ideas, Ryan and I know a lot about this stuff. We're not the end all be all experts. I don't know that anybody really is, right? We get better at practicing harm reduction and housing first by doing it and having these conversations, right? We've all gotten better at this, Ryan and myself included, by being parts of these conversations with other people over the past 6 weeks. But we can't do this work if we're not bringing our creativity, our patience, and our empathy to the table, right? And the last thing I want to say is our job is just to keep the doors open. We can't judge somebody's motivation or desire or willingness to change. Often we'll think, you know, I see this person day in, day out, I'm getting the same thing, you know, we're not getting anywhere, they're not getting any better, but we're not privy to somebody's internal process of readying themselves to change, right? It's not our job to only support the people that seem ready. Our job is to keep the doors open for the folks that are most in need of our assistance and just continually remind them, just come on in, right? Invite them into the treatment process. Whenever you're ready, we're here, right? And we've got you in the meantime. We're gonna meet people where they're at, but not leave them there either. So hope that this has been helpful. Really appreciate y'all for being with us in the last 6 weeks. That's what we got. Ryan's dropped the link to the course evaluation in the chat. I won't bother y'all any longer since we're 5 minutes over, but please keep up with us. I think we're going to do some webinars through RIZE, shorter, one-off. I think we're going to do an eviction prevention strategies webinar. You might have gotten an email about that, but hopefully we'll see y'all again soon.
Thank you.
Thanks, y'all. It's great getting to know you.
Thanks a lot, you
Thanks,
guys.
guys.
You guys are great.
Thank you very much.